Thank you, first of all, so much, because I know you're busy, and I just want you to know that we're very grateful, first of all.
Toby Keith was a man to never hold back, and that boldness made him a lightning rod for controversy. From clashes with fellow artists to showdowns with media giants, these 5 unforgettable feuds helped shape country music's modern legacy. Stay tuned as we dive into the rivalries that defined his career. Number 5. Natalie Maines. Natalie Maines, the dynamic and outspoken lead singer of the country music group formerly known as the Dixie Chicks, now the Chicks, has been a figure of both admiration and controversy within the music industry for many years. It was not solely her voice that captured headlines, it was her readiness to express her opinions, particularly regarding politics. The crucial and contentious moment in Natalie Maines' career took place in March 2003 at a concert in London, just days prior to the United States invasion of Iraq. On stage, Maines spoke to the audience, expressing that they were aligned with them. She mentioned that they did not desire the war or the violence, and she conveyed their shame regarding the fact that the President of the United States hailed from Texas. This remark, aimed at then President George W. Bush, sparked a significant backlash throughout the United States, especially within the conservative-leaning country music scene. Radio stations began to remove their songs from airplay, fans organized CD burnings, and the group faced death threats. Toby Keith publicly opposed Maines after her remarks, releasing his post-9/11 anthem, courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, The Angry American. Maines labeled the song as ignorant, describing it as simplistic and excessively aggressive, implying it represented a dangerous mindset in the post-9/11 American context. In response, Keith ridiculed her during his concerts, even projecting a manipulated image of Natalie Maines embracing Saddam Hussein during his shows, a portrayal that many deemed distasteful and provocative. This ignited a highly publicized conflict between the two celebrities, with the media documenting every exchange they had. Maines intensified the dispute by donning a t-shirt at the 2003 Academy of Country Music Awards that displayed the letters FUTK on the front. Although she asserted it represented freedom, unity, truth, and knowledge, many perceived it as a direct insult to Toby Keith. Keith later remarked that he was not offended and brushed off the feud, yet the friction between the two musicians had already come to symbolize the larger rift in the country music industry between traditional patriotism and progressive critique. It is reasonable to say that Keith had similar political opinions with other notable figures. Let's find out. Number 4. Peter Jennings. Peter Jennings was a monumental presence in American journalism, renowned for being the sophisticated, well-informed, and globally aware anchor of ABC's World News. Tonight, a position he occupied for more than 20 years. In the mid-60s, ABC News in the United States recruited him as a correspondent, and at the young age of 26, he was appointed anchor of the evening news, one of the youngest individuals to ever hold that title. His first tenure as anchor from 1965 to 1967 was chaotic, primarily due to his youth and perceived lack of hard news experience, but Jennings was resolute in his desire to prove his worth. A meticulous perfectionist with a kind disposition, Jennings was well known in the newsroom for his unwavering dedication to journalistic integrity and his meticulous approach to sourcing, language, and context. He reported on numerous significant historical events, such as the Challenger disaster, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Gulf War, the impeachment of Clinton, and the disputed 2000 U.S. presidential election. Yet, one of his most crucial moments occurred on September 11, 2001, when Jennings anchored ABC's live coverage for more than 17 consecutive hours, becoming a comforting presence for millions of Americans in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks. During this time, patriotism surged in both media and popular culture, highlighting the growing divide between objective journalism and emotionally charged commentary. This is where Peter Jennings found himself inadvertently embroiled in a cultural conflict with country music artist Toby Keith. In the wake of the 9/11 attacks, Toby Keith released a song called Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, The Angry American, a deeply emotional and vengeful anthem that expressed support for U.S. troops and a yearning for retribution. While the song struck a chord with many Americans, critics argued that it veered into jingoism and crude nationalism. Toby Keith claimed that Jennings declined to let him perform the song on a televised ABC patriotic special, supposedly due to its aggressive tone. Keith later remarked that Jennings deemed the song too inflammatory and divisive for national airing. This incident ignited a public outcry from Keith, who claimed that Jennings was disconnected from the patriotic sentiments of the era. Although Jennings never publicly confronted the dispute, the rumor spread widely, contributing to a broader cultural discussion about the conflict between journalistic restraint and performative patriotism. Known for his commitment to neutrality and intellectual rigor, Jennings often found himself at odds with the overt symbolism embodied in Keith's song during emotionally charged national moments. It's crucial to emphasize that Jennings was not unpatriotic. In fact, he believed his journalistic duty was to provide reasoned, clear, and fact-based reporting rather than engage in cheerleading or emotional provocation. The alleged incident with Keith came to symbolize the cultural divides in America following 9/11, as news anchors, musicians, politicians, and citizens grappled with how to convey grief, anger, and national pride while maintaining equilibrium. Despite this minor controversy, Jennings remained dedicated to his primary objective: delivering international news in a media landscape that was becoming increasingly insular. He advocated for thorough foreign coverage, upheld a significant overseas bureau presence, and frequently allocated airtime to international matters that other networks overlooked. Additionally, he promoted in-depth reporting and resisted the sensationalism that began to pervade network and cable news in the early 2000s. Number 3, Kristofferson. Kristofferson stands out as one of the most impactful and versatile personalities in American entertainment, embodying the essence of a Renaissance man. His life encompasses military service, exceptional songwriting, Hollywood fame, and a commitment to political activism. Kristofferson's songwriting career took off. He created timeless tracks. His songwriting style was a stark contrast to the polished, formulaic country songs prevalent at the time. He infused his work with raw honesty, emotional depth, and poetic richness that struck a chord with listeners from various genres. Kristofferson also produced his own albums and gained recognition as a singer-songwriter in his own right, despite his rugged and unrefined vocal delivery. By the early 70s, he had become a Grammy-winning artist and a prominent figure in the outlaw country scene alongside contemporaries like Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and Waylon Jennings. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Kristofferson's stature as a serious actor and a rebellious songwriter who defied traditional norms expanded significantly. He was celebrated for his raw authenticity, his outspoken political views, and his unwillingness to adhere to the expectations set by the Nashville establishment or Hollywood elites. One particularly notable, though less publicized, instance of tension involved Toby Keith, a well-known country artist recognized for his patriotic and pro-military anthems. In the mid-2000s, rumors circulated that Kristofferson confronted Keith backstage at a tribute show for Willie Nelson, allegedly challenging him for glorifying war through his music. Although both artists later denied that any heated exchange occurred, the incident highlighted the ideological and generational rift between Kristofferson's anti-war beliefs and the post-9/11 brand of country patriotism that Keith embodied. Despite such rumored conflicts, Kristofferson largely upheld a reputation for quiet dignity, opting for thoughtful confrontation and poetic resistance rather than engaging in loud public disputes. As time progressed, Kristofferson continued to create music, often collaborating with longtime friends and fellow artists. Number 2, Merle Haggard. Merle Haggard and Toby Keith stand as monumental figures in the realm of country music, each embodying distinct eras and viewpoints within the genre. Toby Keith gained prominence in the 90s and early 2000s with his bold, outspoken persona and fiercely patriotic songs, while Merle Haggard is celebrated as a legend from the classic outlaw period, recognized for his lyrical artistry, emotional resonance, and insightful reflections on American life. Their interactions in the public sphere were not marked by a conventional rivalry, but rather by a significant ideological clash that highlighted underlying tensions within the country music scene. The event that captured public interest occurred in the early 2000s, amidst the surge of patriotic sentiment following 9/11. Toby Keith's contentious hit, courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, The Angry America, was topping the charts and igniting both fervent support and substantial backlash. Keith emerged as a figure of steadfast, aggressive patriotism. While his supporters rallied around the message, many artists and critics perceived it as overly simplistic and provocative. Among them was Merle Haggard, a revered figure in country music, celebrated for hits like Okie from Muskogee and If We Make It Through December. Although Haggard had penned patriotic and politically charged songs during his heyday, his style was often infused with nuance, contradiction, and social commentary. In interviews from around 2003, Haggard candidly voiced his unease with the prevailing tone of modern country music, specifically criticizing the messaging associated with Toby Keith. While he didn't always mention Keith by name, his allusions were unmistakable. In one interview, he remarked, "There's too much anger in the songs, too much chest pounding. It feels like a cheer for war." This critique did not go unnoticed. Toby Keith reacted in his usual manner, unapologetic, defensive, and confrontational. Although he didn't respond to Haggard with the same fervor he had shown towards Natalie Maines, it was evident that he perceived the remarks as a jab. Keith contended that his music was a tribute to the military rather than a glorification of violence, asserting that he was merely voicing the sentiments of a segment of America that felt overlooked. The dichotomy between the two musicians became emblematic, Keith symbolizing the bold, defiant patriotism of a post-9/11 era, Haggard embodying a more contemplative, lived experience of American narrative. The so-called feud never truly developed into overt animosity. In fact, over the years, the story evolved. Haggard later made it clear that although he had reservations about the tone of some of Keith's songs, he held him in high regard as a songwriter and performer. During 2006 interviews, Haggard went so far as to commend Keith's abilities, stating that Toby's a great writer, and he's got guts. It's respectable. In turn, Keith began to express more admiration for Haggard, acknowledging him as one of the influential figures in his musical path and even performing some of Haggard's songs in his live shows. Keith faced so many backlash regarding his genre of music and political stance. Let's see who's next on the list. Number 1, Kacey Musgraves. Keith's bold patriotism and lyrics propelled him into the limelight as a representation of a defiant, nationalistic style of country music. His persona was unapologetically masculine, pro-military, and anti-establishment, particularly in relation to liberal politics or media. Keith embraced a character that struck a chord with traditional conservative audiences, becoming a beacon for real America during a period of national distress and political discord. In contrast, Kacey Musgraves emerged as his philosophical opposite. Her debut album in 2013, Same Trailer, Different Park, along with its hit single Follow Your Arrow, not only challenged country music norms musically, but also ideologically. Musgraves addressed topics like marijuana use, loving freely, and defying small-town expectations, themes that put her at odds with Nashville's conservative heart. As her popularity grew, so did her reputation as one of the few mainstream country artists advocating for progressive values, openly supporting LGBTQ+ rights, and questioning the genre's historical barriers. The cultural clash between Musgraves and Keith was never explicitly confronted, yet it unfolded through symbols, interviews, and underlying messages. Musgraves, for example, made a shade critique of the nationalistic tendencies prevalent in country music, a hallmark of Keith's approach in a 2018 profile with the New York Times, where she stated she doesn't see herself aligning with what a lot of people think country music stands for right now. Although she refrained from specifying individuals, her tone unmistakably indicated that she was separating herself from the boots and flags, war on terror sentiment that had previously ruled the charts. In her Grammy-winning album Golden Hour from 2018, Musgraves reportedly embraced a dreamy pop country sound, combined with poetic lyrics and subtle political themes. It was noted that while Keith focused on rallying cries to build his brand, Musgraves chose to reflect and rebel through a more understated approach. Her form of quiet resistance, which involved standing firm without raising her voice, was seen as a unique protest against the culture that Keith had a hand in shaping. Conversely, it was mentioned that Toby Keith did not publicly address Musgraves, yet his previous remarks about artists who try too hard to be politically correct or fail to honor their roots seemed to resonate with the veiled criticisms that others in his circle have aimed at progressive country musicians. Keith has often portrayed himself as a champion of real country music, which many interpret as a subtle critique of artists who mix genres or question conservative norms. In this manner, it was noted that the tension between them transcended mere aesthetics. It was fundamentally about the ownership of the genre's essence. Keith was seen as embodying an America that glorifies military strength, traditional values, and patriotism with a firm grip. In contrast, Musgraves was viewed as representing an America that cherishes personal freedom, inclusivity, and quiet reflection. They were perceived as singing to different versions of America, which were not always in communication with one another. During award shows and country events, the differences were particularly evident. Musgraves was acknowledged by the Grammys and received acclaim from artists beyond the country genre, while she often faced neglect from the Academy of Country Music, ACM, and the Country Music Association, CMA, regarding nominations in her formative years. Conversely, Keith was adored by these institutions throughout the 2000s before ultimately choosing to go independent to steer clear of the politics he found unappealing. This institutional divide was seen as a reflection of the deeper, unspoken rift that existed between artists like Keith and Musgraves. Fans have observed the tension as well. Online, it has been noted that Musgraves is frequently criticized by country traditionalists for allegedly not being country enough, while her supporters contend that she embodies the future of country music, inclusive, diverse, and innovative. This criticism, the claim of not being country enough, is one that Toby Keith's fans have often directed at progressive artists, even when Keith himself chose to remain silent. What is perhaps most revealing is the way each artist reacts to political events. Following the 2016 election, Musgraves shared ambiguous yet unmistakable messages promoting inclusivity and hope. She has taken part in LGBTQ+ events and has refused to tone down her lyrics for radio play. In contrast, Keith performed at Donald Trump's pre-inauguration concert, a choice that drew criticism but solidified his reputation as a political artist, one who is unafraid to embrace right-wing nationalism. Therefore, is there a conflict between Kacey Musgraves and Toby Keith? Not in terms of direct quotes or tweets, but in their values, certainly. Toby Keith had much more conflicts with even those we can't put a name to. Let's explore other people Toby had issues with. Unnamed music critics and political opponents. Throughout his career, it was noted that Toby Keith became one of the most divisive figures in contemporary country music, not solely due to his bold musical style and baritone bravado, but also because of his unapologetically patriotic themes that sparked criticism from unnamed music critics and political adversaries alike. While it was acknowledged that Keith enjoyed tremendous commercial success, selling millions of albums and consistently producing hits like Courtesy of the Red, White and Blue, The Angry American and American Soldier, there was a concurrent report in which critics, often unnamed in interviews or public statements, accused him of promoting jingoism, oversimplifying intricate political issues, and fostering a type of nationalism that did not resonate well with more progressive audiences. These unnamed critics, many of whom were culture columnists, music journalists, and media commentators, seldom confronted him directly, but frequently utilized reviews, think pieces, and editorials to challenge both the musical and ethical implications of his most renowned songs. Much of the criticism surrounding Keith intensified following the events of 9/11, as his assertive pro-American messaging conflicted with the larger discussions about war, peace, and national identity. His popular song, Courtesy of the Red, White and Blue, became a focal point of controversy. Critics, ranging from contributors at NPR to reviewers at Rolling Stone, penned harsh critiques suggesting that Keith's lyrics celebrated violence and retribution instead of fostering healing or understanding. In his own recounting, Keith often did not name these critics, although he generally referred to them in interviews and public statements, accusing them of being elites who were out of touch with the working-class American audience he represented. Politically, Keith was perceived as a staunch American patriot, yet he frequently complicated political categorizations. While many believed he had a far-right inclination based on his music's content, Keith identified himself as a conservative Democrat and often criticized both political parties when he disagreed with their policies. Nonetheless, his public persona became closely linked with the post-9/11 conservative movement in America, which placed him in opposition to liberal commentators, some of whom viewed his music as a cultural endorsement of military interventionism and uncritical nationalism. Although these critics seldom identified themselves in a manner that would provoke open discussion, their impact influenced how specific audiences viewed Keith's work, frequently dismissing it as either simplistic or politically harmful. In certain instances, the opposition manifested not just through published critiques, but also through institutional gatekeeping. Keith often expressed in interviews that award ceremonies, television networks, and radio stations grew hesitant to broadcast or honor his more politically charged pieces, particularly during the peak of the Iraq War. He asserted that some networks declined to air renditions of songs such as The Angry American because they were considered too controversial, a statement that resonated during his brief conflict with Peter Jennings of ABC News, who turned down Keith's performance for a patriotic special. While Jennings refuted any personal animosity, the incident became emblematic of a more profound cultural rift between Keith's audience and mainstream media. In reaction to the unnamed political and cultural elites he believed were stifling him, Keith intensified his persona, creating albums and tours that honored small-town pride, military service, and rugged masculinity. His Red, White, and Blue tour was described as a platform where fans could connect with a raw expression of American patriotism, distancing itself from the critiques of urban commentators. Nevertheless, he faced criticism, especially from music journalists who perceived his message as simplistic or provocative. Some detractors claimed that his songs lacked the lyrical depth found in the works of contemporaries like Johnny Cash or Kristofferson, the latter of whom was said to have confronted Keith at a tribute concert regarding what he considered glorification of war, although the details of that incident are disputed. Keith was noted for not avoiding his critics, even if he seldom mentioned them by name. In various interviews, he positioned himself as a representative of the working class, a truth-teller who did not seek approval from liberal critics in New York or LA. He frequently pointed out that while elite critics may have dismissed his artistry, his record sales, sold-out performances, and backing from military families painted a contrasting picture. However, the discord between his commercial success and critical acclaim persisted. Unlike other country musicians who eventually shifted towards broader appeal or softened their messages, Keith remained steadfast, which only intensified the rift with critics. Even in his later years, as he released songs that were more introspective and less flamboyant, some critics continued to cling to the earlier perception of Keith as the boot-in-your-ass cowboy, either unable or unwilling to see him through a more different perspective. Politically, Keith also caught both opponents and allies off guard. He performed for presidents from both the Republican and Democratic parties, including George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and at times, he criticized the Bush administration's approach to the war effort. These actions baffled political adversaries who preferred their cultural icons to maintain a more consistent ideological stance, leading critics to often accuse Keith of being indecisive, leveraging patriotic music for personal benefit without taking a definitive position on policy. Nevertheless, the lack of perspective in much of the criticism revealed as much about his detractors as it did about him. By refusing to conform to political or musical stereotypes, Keith attracted a uniquely diverse and sometimes contradictory fan base, one that included blue-collar workers, veterans, conservative families, and even politically moderate listeners who simply valued his straightforward storytelling. Over time, some of his earlier critics began to soften their stance, particularly as Keith's lyrics became more reflective, exploring themes of fatherhood, faith, mortality, and personal legacy. However, what frequently gets missed in conversations about Toby Keith's detractors is the wider cultural significance of their disapproval. Rather than hindering his success, the ongoing critiques, even when subtle or anonymous, reinforced Keith's image as a rebel against the coastal elite and mainstream media. For numerous fans, these criticisms affirmed their own experiences of cultural alienation. When publications based in New York or LA took aim at Keith's lyrics, it transcended mere reviews. It became emblematic of a perceived urban disdain for rural values. Thus, the backlash served as fuel for Keith's persona as a real American truth-teller who communicated in a straightforward and defiant manner. This divide also prompted discussions within the country music scene regarding authenticity, free speech, and the artist's role in political discourse. Keith's unwillingness to retreat made it increasingly difficult for other artists to stay neutral. He pushed the boundaries so far in one direction that even those with more moderate views had to clarify their positions. While the industry often attempted to maintain a united front, Keith's presence splintered the genre, giving rise to two distinct paths in country music: the radio-friendly, flag-waving anthems of patriotism versus the more reflective, poetic storytelling of artists like Jason Isbell, Sturgill Simpson, or Casey Musgraves. Both styles achieved success, yet the friction between them mirrored the larger polarization within American culture. Moreover, the criticism directed at Keith ignited debates about artistic accountability. Was it inappropriate for an artist to profit from national sorrow and wartime sentiments? Or was he merely articulating what countless Americans were already experiencing? That question persisted, particularly as younger audiences and critics revisited his body of work with a more nuanced historical perspective. Retrospective analyses began to portray Keith not solely as a political artist, but as a reflection of early 2000s American sentiment, especially in. The announcement of his stomach cancer diagnosis in 2022 elicited a wave of sympathy from across the political and musical landscape, including from some who had previously criticized him harshly. In his final years, Keith remained a symbol of unapologetic Americana, cherished by many, dismissed by others, and consistently misunderstood by a critical establishment that never fully grasped what to make of him. The unnamed critics and political adversaries he encountered never deterred him from being a best-selling artist, a relentless performer, and a cultural icon. Despite his declining health, Keith remained a symbol of resilience and determination, characteristics that shaped his public image. He made a few public appearances, kept fans updated, and showed appreciation for their support, which strengthened the profound bond he shared with his audience. For many, his struggle with cancer brought a human element to a persona often perceived as larger than life. It served as a reminder to both critics and fans that behind the music and controversies was a man committed to his art, his family, and his nation. Confronting his own mortality, Toby Keith's legacy became increasingly intricate, and for some, even more commendable. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.